Hi, I'm Dave Hyatt. I was talking with my daughter the other night, and she kind of gave me an idea. Because I've lived life very different. So now, in the face of the coronavirus and the people being worried about not eating, if you've noticed, you go to grocery stores and the shelves are cleaned off. In my opinion, some of the most interesting places. Like I said, I live a different life. I've always cooked from home, cooked from scratch. I learned to cook as a rancher with being out on the farm, and sometimes over campfires and things like that. So for me, life hasn't made a big change during the coronavirus scare. But my daughter was saying how her friends and people she's around are worried because they can't find food. I went to the grocery store, and interestingly, there's you can buy all the flour, the sugar, all the baking aisle is still well stocked. The cereal aisles, the prepared food aisles are the ones that are empty. And so I thought that I would at least go through a fast tutorial, one each day, on how to cook certain types of foods. I'm going to start with probably the basics, breads, because they'll be the staple through a case like this. The caveat of obviously to that is if you are someone who has celiac disease or something, then you'll want to substitute the flour for something different and maybe a different recipe. But for the most part, the breads will be a good staple for you. Simplest ones to start with is baking powder biscuits. Then we'll go to batters for like pancakes. We'll then move into yeast type breads, where there's pizza dough, loaf of bread, bagels, those types of items. Hopefully, quick tutorials. What I will do is I will show you what I do, how I make it. I will put the recipe in the notes section so that you can see them, and you can follow along and make your own if you wish. Like I said, I'm making a slight adjustment because I'm cooking in a kitchen, as you can see with this one. I do most of my cooking outdoors. I use a book. I can't even find this anymore. It's called Black Magic Skillet. The recipes are not mine. They belong to Rex Price. Right here you can see. I've tried to Google him to find him, get his information, and I'm not finding him anymore. So I'm not sure if the book is in print or not. But this book can teach you a lot about cooking. Some things I learned from Rex when in here, and I will do a fast tutorial on this as well, is if for some reason we need refrigeration and our refrigerators are out, power's out, something like that. Living in Houston, I've seen this a lot because we get a hurricane and we lived 16 days without electricity. One of the things you can do, and I learned from Rex, is you can culture yogurts, buttermilk, and sour creams, and they don't require the intense refrigeration that raw dairy products like milk does. So I will do a quick tutorial on how to make a yogurt or how to make a buttermilk. And buttermilk substitutes for milk in every recipe almost perfectly. In fact, I think better, because the flavor of the buttermilk makes the recipe taste better. But anyway, I just thought about it, and I'm kind of seeing this as my personal ministry at the time. The biscuits are about to come out, so I will see you when they do. Thank you. So today, what we are going to be making is baking powder biscuits. The materials or items that you will need to make the biscuits are, one, measuring devices, so cups, quarter cups, 1 cup, 3/4, it's an array of those. You'll need some measuring spoons, specifically a 1 teaspoon and a 1 tablespoon. You'll need something to cut the shortening in with. So they have a device called a pastry cutter, which works really well. But if you do not have a pastry cutter, don't fret, because you can just use a sturdy fork to be able to do the same thing. We'll need some kind of a device to cut circles out of the dough once we make the dough, and a rolling pin right here to be able to roll the dough out. If you don't have a rolling pin, you can still probably just pat it out on a countertop with your hands and do just as well. The last item that I would tell you you need is some sort of a measuring bowl. Let me move this around. There you go. A measuring bowl so that you, or a mixing bowl so that you can put all your ingredients in. And in a second I will stage it and I'll show you the ingredients. Okay, so the ingredients that we need to make baking powder biscuits is milk, which we have here. Any brand, any kind works. Eggs, and I cook for a very large family, so we buy eggs in bulk. Salt, we'll need some salt, and once again, any brand of salt will work. A shortening product. Now this is one where I do kind of stay specific on. Crisco makes a much better shortening product than others. It works better, so I would stay with that brand. We need baking powder, any brand, they all work. Some sort of baking soda. I have it in a larger bowl here, but this is sugar. And then the large container in the back I have filled with flour. Those are the ingredients that we need. Okay, I've went ahead and measured out all of the ingredients just so that it would make time a little bit faster during the video. But this is the flour, so I'm going to mix my flour into my mixing bowl. This here is the sugar, the baking soda, the baking powder that you might need, and salt. So I'm putting that in. And this is all the dry ingredients. We want to make sure the dry ingredients are mixed well. So I'm just doing that right now just to get it well mixed. Okay. Now this is the shortening. This is 3/4 of a cup of shortening, but this is a large batch too. It's 3 times a normal batch. You notice I use my fingers. It's essential to make sure you wash before you start, because at some point you're going to get your hands dirty. Alright, here's the pastry cutter. This is where, if you use a pastry cutter, you can just cut the shortening into the dough. I learned to cook through a camp cook. He was an outfitter up in Idaho. He didn't carry this kind of stuff with him. He did not have a pastry cutter, and so he just used his fingers and rubbed his fingers together in the mixture until he broke the shortening down. You could use a fork, just sit and pat it with a fork, push through it, and break the shortening into smaller components as well. Okay, we've got the shortening cut and in fair amount of small pieces, fairly evenly distributed, I hope. We can just mix it good. While I'm mixing it, I'm just looking at the flakiness of the flour where the shortening is to make sure that they're all small pieces. Alright, I'm going to push this aside for a brief second and I'll bring it back. The next is that we need to have 3 well-beaten eggs. So I'm going to crack the eggs into here. If you're careful cracking the eggs, you won't get shell in your solution. But if you do get a shell in there, just take a fork reach in and pull it out. It's not a big deal. See, my eggshell came apart right there. I can see a little piece, so I'm going to take a fork and see if I can catch it before it gets in there. And there we go, got it. Now to beat it, you're just going to poke the yolks a couple of times to break them, and take the there you have eggs that are well beaten. So I can bring the dry ingredients back. We'll pour the eggs in, and I'll add the milk, and I'll hold a little bit of milk back for just a minute. The reason I hold the milk back is you can't always guarantee you're going to get the consistency of the dough that you want. If you've mismeasured just a little bit on the flour, you're a little light, or for some reason the flour takes the milk up at a different rate than others, so you'll end up adjusting at the end, adding a little bit extra milk, maybe not quite as much milk. If you get it too wet, that's okay. You can just add some more flour and make it drier. It's probably just a little bit too dry yet, but it's close. Actually, it's pretty sticky. I don't know if you want to add any more milk than that, to tell you the truth. Now, it's time to knead the dough in. I'm going to do that by taking a little extra flour. I'm going to put it right here because we'll end up using it on the countertop. The reason I'm flouring my hands is to try to prevent the dough from sticking to my hands any more than it has to. Now, this step here, you notice, is a little messy. If you have children, they enjoy it. Oh, let's get messy. But you don't want to over knead, because the shortening will spread out too much and you'll lose your flakiness. I think that's going to be good. Okay, so now I'm going to set the dough a little too sticky. It might be a little too wet, but we'll make up for that here in just a minute. I'm going to set the dough back. We're going to put some flour out here on my countertop. I'll take about half of the dough. And we'll get a rolling pin and we will roll it out, and then we'll cut it into round circles. Okay, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut it into a little round circle, and then I will put that on my cookie sheet. When I get these all done, I will show you the cookie sheet when we're finished. Okay, I'm back. I did not put these on the pan because I wanted you to see something that I forgot to tell you. We needed a little butter and a cookie sheet. You can hear the background of the oven warming up to 425 degrees right now. And it'll make a little hiss, and there's, you know, unfortunately we don't have a production studio, so. But I like to take a little melted butter and take and you notice how the biscuits have become more solid now that we are, you know, done making them. As time went on, they went ahead and became more solid. A lot easier to work with. You notice my hands aren't as dirty. But if I'll take the biscuit and I'll dip it in the butter briefly, let it drip, and put it on the pan, it does two things. It creates a non-stick bottom for that, and then also the butter will soak into the biscuit while we're cooking it and just give it a really good flavor. So I like to do that. If you don't want to dip it in the butter, which is perfectly fine too, just get a little bit of shortening, rub on the bottom of your pan so it won't stick to the bottom of the pan. Some no-stick spray of some sort will work just as well. And then when I'm stacking these on the pan, notice I'm just kind of stacking them to where they touch each other in a crisscross hatch pattern. Okay, I will get these in, and as soon as the oven is warmed up to 425 degrees, we will put them in and let them cook for 15 minutes. Depending on where you live and your altitude makes a huge difference on how long you let it cook. If you're at a high altitude, mountains, you'll probably have to let it cook for 20 or 25. Reason being is the air pressure isn't putting as much downforce on the surfaces, and so your heat doesn't go as warm in those environments as they do at sea level, or like me, I'm maybe 500 feet above sea level is all. That's just some things to consider when you're baking. If you haven't baked before, your elevation, things will cook a little slower at higher elevations. Just have to be ready for that. We're almost done with this pan. This baking powder biscuits are easy to make. They're one of the more simple doughs that you would make. That's why I'm showing you them first, assuming that you're a beginner at baking. There are other options. There's yeast breads, which I'll get to eventually with this, and then we'll teach you a few other things, but yeast breads are a little bit harder to make. Pancakes are fairly easy. That'll probably be the next one that I'll show you. All right, I'm going to get the other pan, and I will meet you in a minute. Okay, so the oven just beeped. It said that it was at 425 degrees. I've got the camera angle shot over. You can see the two pans of biscuits ready to go in, and so I will put those in and set the timer for 15 minutes. Because the pans are cold, I won't need to put a hot pad on, but when I bring them out I will. Okay, so it's been the allotted time. I had to let it go a little bit longer because they hadn't properly browned. But the biscuits are ready to come out of the oven. And notice, if you have glasses, this is a fun point in time. Look at those, see how they look. Nice, big, thick. Now, my daughter, during the hurricanes, used a term that was pretty good. They was showing all the houses that had been flooded, and then when we went out to help with the people and help them with their houses, she smelled them, and she says, you know, a television just is not a smell-o-vision. Well, unfortunately, I can't do it justice for you here, but if you could smell these coming out of the oven, they smell delicious.